Welcome to the ESOP Minicast. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Brett Kiesling, and as it says on my business cards, I'm a passionate advocate for employee ownership. On our primary EO ESOP podcast, we're in the midst of a three-part series featuring Peter Newman, founder and principal of Peak Wealth Planning. We dropped part 1 earlier this week in an episode called Successful Retirement Planning. Part 2 drops January 16th, and it's our deepest dive yet on the podcast on the nuts and bolts of diversification and distributions. The final episode airs January 23rd, and it discusses personal financial well-being for employee owners. In order to tee up part 2, dropping next week, I thought on the minicast we would share this very brief excerpt that gives an overview of diversification. Keep in mind that oftentimes we'll speak on the podcast in generalities, and your specific ESOP plan may be a little bit different. So always check your own plan, or at least the summary plan description of your plan, so that you know exactly what your plan calls for. With that, here's Peter Newman with a very brief overview on diversification.
Diversification is usually the first time the idea of retirement planning comes up. And what does diversification mean, and when does it happen? Diversification means that you have the option, but not the obligation, to sell back some shares to the company or to the ESOP, to the trust, as a participant in this tax-deferred retirement account. And most companies that I see offer the first diversification event when you hit the milestone age of age 55 and you've had at least 10 years of participation in the ESOP. And at age 55, if you're eligible for diversification, you'll receive a notification that says, hey, Joe, you have $2 million in your employee stock ownership plan, and you're eligible to sell back 500,000 of that. And then the company, when you sell that $500,000 back, you'll indicate on a form, I would like to sell my $500,000 back, and I would like to either A, move that money to an individual retirement account, B, I might be able to move that money to a company 401k plan, or C, I might receive a check. I might say, hey, mail me a check, I want some money. And if you select option C, when you turn that form back in, you need to be aware that you will owe a regular income tax on that $500,000 in my example. And because you're below age 59 and a half, in my example for someone age 55, you will also owe a 10% IRS tax penalty. Many folks are not aware of the penalty for below age 59 and a half. And there are definitely pros and cons to why one might take the diversification and receive a check. There's pros and cons to why you might continue to move it over to an IRA and build wealth for retirement. But the other thing to understand is that 55 is an option. You're not required to sell back those shares. You could say, hey, I think my company is doing really well. I want to let my $2 million grow even more in our example. And I'm going to wait and see at age 56, 57, 58, 59 how the company is doing. But that option of that 25% remains available each year. Under IRS guidelines and most summary plan documents I've seen for ESOPs, that goes up to 50% at age 60. So it gives you an incremental stepping stone to diversify additional shares. And I'll stop there, Brett, and see what thoughts you have before we go a layer deeper into diversification.
I appreciate that. And let me just clarify, the up to 50% at age 60, is that 50% is the diversification, not the tax penalty?
Correct. That's 50% diversification. So in our example, let's just say, to keep the math simple, you had a $2 million account at age 55. Let's pretend there were no share value changes and you didn't receive any additional shares between age 55 and 60. Just to make it simple, you could sell back 500,000 at age 55. You wait till you're age 60, and then you sell back another 500,000. That gets you $500,000 of 2 million, half of all the shares and all the value you've accreted. Once you sell back the first 25%, it doesn't go 50% of the remaining amount. It's 50% of all the shares you've ever received. Good. Excellent. So that's an excellent question.
This will wrap up this episode of the minicast. I hope you'll join us Tuesday, January 16th for part 2 of my 3-part podcast episodes with Peter Newman of Peak Wealth Planning. Thank you so much for listening. This is Brett Kiesling. Be well.
We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook at EO Podcast Network and on Twitter at ESOP Podcast. This podcast has been produced by Brett Kiesling for the EO Podcast Network. Original music composed by Max Kiesling. Branding and marketing by Bitsy Plus Design. And I'm Bitsy McCann.